This is a recording of Bob Schlappi made on September 28, 1988 at the Oldsmobile History Center at 4000 North Grand River in Lansing, Michigan. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw. Good now. Okay, Bob, if you would just give me your name and phone number and address, if you would, please.
Bob Schlappi, 1109 Seymour, Grand Ledge, 48837.
Okay,
Phone number 627-8684.
great. And then, Bob, if you would just take us back to when you started at Oldsmobile, where you started, and go on from there.
I started Olds in, I think it was January or February 1942, and started with material control,
All right.
Alex Retzlaw.
All right.
And then I went out into the plant with Howard Kane,
So
Billy Glazier.
you started in the office then in building
Started in the
60?
office, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the war had just started.
The war had just started, right?
All right.
You know, December.
Yeah. 7th.
Yeah. Yeah. And
how long did you stay there in 60 then?
well, till I went into service, the next just about a year.
All right.
And just about a year.
Okay.
So it was went into service at 43.
Now, were Lindy and Howard there in
Yes.
60 also?
Yeah.
Okay.
They were there, and I went out into eventually after 2 or 3 months, I think it was.
Okay.
Went out into the 37 millimeter, 75 millimeter gun plant.
Which was where?
Seemed like it was building 36, maybe, you know.
36 or 38?
Yeah,
Okay.
somewhere
Yeah.
not too
Okay.
far down,
All right.
you know, the old Pine Street exit, not
Yeah.
Pine Street, I mean the Elm Street exit.
Yeah.
Not too far in.
Then we made both of those guns in
Yeah.
the same?
Well, no, 37, no, they
Okay.
just we had records there of both of them.
All
So
right.
we were involved
Okay.
with the records, and
Okay.
I was a teletype operator.
What was that for?
Well, they wanted all the stuff, information, receipts, you know,
Okay.
parts received, whatever it was, sent over to Material Control, who was Alex Retzlaw,
Yeah.
Bill Wilcox, I
Yeah.
don't know whether you remember Bill.
Oh, yeah, remember Bill.
And he ran that whole thing, and
And that's how
they
you
wanted
got the
receiving
information
stuff, right,
from the plant to the office.
into the main office through over a teletype.
Mhm.
And I had taken typing in high school, and I was a pretty decent typist and
Okay.
fairly accurate. So that's what got me the job, I guess. And then was there, I think, on afternoons, as I recall.
All right.
Probably. And then these teletypes just come over, and they were all ready for the next morning
Mhm.
to enter into the records over there. And then about a year, I was there about a year.
Okay.
And took the Air Corps exam at that time,
Mhm.
U.S. Air Corps.
Yeah.
Of course, it was part of the Army,
Yeah.
U.S. Army.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, I passed the exam, and they inducted me in, I think it was just about a year later, in January, February.
43.
43, right?
All right.
43.
Okay. So then you left the plant then. For a
Left the
period of time.
plant. But of course, that was great because I had my 3-year service.
Yeah,
You know,
it
eventually I
counted.
was going to count that.
Yeah.
So
Uh-huh.
that was awfully nice.
So then
And-
when did you return then from your service?
See, they were on strike, or I would have got back in the tail end of 45.
Yeah, that big
Or was
90.
it 46?
No,
I'm
it
not
was
sure.
45.
Was it 45?
Yeah,
Okay.
that long,
yeah.
long strike.
Yeah,
they had.
long strike.
Yeah.
So I couldn't get back in until 46 after
Even
they
though
settled strike.
you'd gotten out of the service.
I'd gotten out of the service.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Actually, I got out in December of 45.
Okay.
ultimately. And about, within 2 or 3 months, as I recall, in 46, I went back.
All right.
And of course, there wasn't any gun plant at that time. So I went back into material control on a midnight shift.
What happened on the midnight shift in material control?
Well, we put out all of the production reports for the various things that we're starting up again, various automotive. And we put out material control. We put out these old Ditto masters. We typed those up, about 3 or 4 or 5 pages. And against the schedule, here's what was scheduled.
Okay.
And then here was the production. And, you had a plus or minus there to see.
And what things did you look at? Just cars, or did you look at
parts?
Just
parts. Parts, yeah.
Parts.
Would
that be
then production of parts, I think it was, you see.
Yeah.
With part numbers, of course, identification.
Sheet metal stuff?
Sheet metal stuff, yeah.
And would you look at engines and all that kind of stuff?
As I recall, there was a separate engine report, transmission report. Yeah, now that you're, jogging the memory. Yeah, there was down at the bottom, kind of finished sub-assemblies down there. And then so many cars were built, as I recall. Yeah. Okay. And so we did that for, I couldn't say how long. Months, probably, several months. And then came along tabulating, punch cards.
Oh, yes. But this all, prior to that time, was all done manually?
All done manually.
Everybody. What did you use for machine?
Typewriters. Just typewriters, yeah.
What'd you add on?
Oh, just regular, I was a
You had a comptometer.
Yeah,
comptometer. Was that what you used?
Right, comptometer, yeah. And there were about 3 of us guys there on that midnight shift that come in and put those reports out. Okay. And run them off, so many each one. And there was probably, 5 or 6, maybe half a dozen, different reports. Yeah. That would go to different places that were people would be interested in.
Did they, that was a night shift. What happened on the day shift?
Well, those got distributed, of course. And then material control took those along with receipts of parts, vendors, and production of parts at Oldsmobile. And of course, it was a kind of an inventory control procedure, see.
But the day shift guys, did they do tabulations too?
No, not as I recall. They were there for the normal clerical, troubleshooting.
Did they do expediting and that kind of crap?
Expediting, yeah, that was all part of it. As I recall, back before, seemed like even before purchasing, purchasing was just purchasing. They didn't do follow-up, as I recall. So the follow-up was done down in material control. And so that's what was going on during the day.
Who was the boss in those days?
Alex Retzloff.
Retzloff was still there.
Yeah, Wilcox was over the whole thing.
Okay.
And then Retzloff was one of his general supervisors.
All right.
And I never forget Johnny Weaver. Do you remember?
I don't know Johnny Weaver, no. Who was Johnny Weaver?
There were still spittoons, on the floor.
Oh, my Lord.
And he chewed tobacco. He chewed tobacco. And there were several others. I don't know whether you remember Don Smith.
I knew a Don Smith, but probably wasn't this Don Smith.
Big guy. Didn't get along too well. But anyway.
Well, now, were those guys were bosses?
No.
Those were workers.
They're just workers,
Okay.
And, but as I say, I just always remember them. There was probably 6 or 8 spittoons still on the floor in that office somewhere.
What a mess.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, over the old Building 60, of course, at that time.
Those guys just went around and went spit in those things?
They'd have one right by the desk, whoever was chewing. And of course, the women weren't allowed to smoke at their desk. Yeah. That was...
What'd they do, come around at night and clean those things out?
Yeah, the janitors would clean those out.
Gosh.
Yeah, dump them and then clean them up again. Oh, dear, what a mess.
But there wasn't any smoking in the office?
No, the ladies. The ladies couldn't smoke.
Could the guys?
Oh, yes, the guys could smoke.
But the ladies were forbidden from smoking?
Yes, that's right.
Interesting.
Yeah, ladies you didn't smoke at your desk if you were, female. So
was that a written rule or an unwritten rule?
Well, I couldn't say that. I wasn't that high up, but I just know that the ladies always had to take a break and go out, and they smoked their cigarettes out in the ladies' room. So that's what went on.
All right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes. Some things, you just almost forget about. This is great.
Okay. Now you went on from the old comptometer approach and computers happened or
started,
something?
well, punch cards.
Oh, punch cards
Punch
started.
cards.
All right, that was before computer.
Yeah,
All
before
right.
computers. And we started getting
When would,
in.
about when would that have been?
Well, it must have been probably 1948, I think.
Okay.
1948 with punch cards. And then we had a crew that would come in and punch that information that was sent in onto punch cards. And then we'd tabulate those. And that we were known as the tabulating
Okay.
group
Now
of
that-
material control.
That was where they would take the cards and run them through and it would count and
Right,
add.
count. We'd
Would
have
it
to
add
sort
and
them.
Would it do all that stuff?
Yes,
too?
oh yes.
Okay.
Oh boy, highfalutin machines,
Yeah.
man,
Oh,
oh
yeah.
man. It wasn't even electronics, it was
Just
strictly
all
electromechanical,
Uh-huh,
right?
uh-huh.
And
Okay.
So,
Now, did that get rid of everybody's comptometers then?
I don't think it was too long after that I see a lot of comptometers went down to Ted Galkey's office
Uh-huh.
and
Got
out the
dumped.
door. Yeah, got dumped, yeah. So there was, that was the demise of that anyway.
Did people have the mechanical calculators at that time? The old Marchand?
Oh, yeah, and the 10 key adding machine with tapes, Oh,
okay.
yes,
So
they had
used
that.
those.
Usually the comptometers were in a group, you had to be kind of
Well, you had to be pretty good to run one of those.
to do those, see. And they just compiled the figures, you know what I mean? They just balance. We had to run balances, checks, and have to see that it added up and that sort of thing. And that's really what the comptometers were.
Okay.
So it was a step of progress, of course, then to put this information into punch card.
Now, you had all of the punchers then in the
Oh, yes,
department?
key punchers, right? Key punchers. We put on an afternoon or midnight shift. I forgot. I think we had both, as I recall. And usually all girls, of course.
It was, okay.
Key punch operators. And then we, had sorters, and these, oh my, they would sort 200 or 300 cards a minute.
Phenomenal, wasn't it?
Yeah. Of course, we'd have jams, you'd have to be able to clear those out. We had collators, however you want to say it, that merged the deck. After you got them in sequence, we'd sort them in part number sequence. Usually everything was part numbers we were dealing with. So we'd sort them in part number sequence in order to ultimately tabulate those on a printer. And the printer, of course, had capabilities with adding and subtracting, of course, too. You could put minuses in. And no multiplying, of course, at that time, within the computer. And it would grind away these cards. In other words, we'd sort them, we'd collate different decks together. We'd have a master deck of names, part number and name, that'd be a card, and then the detail cards. And then, of course, you'd put these all together in a collator and then get them ready for a report to run on the printer.
And then it would print your part numbers and names and numbers that related to volumes or whatever.
And the printers had the old stick print bars. At first, they were all just numerics. You couldn't print alphabetic. I think you had a limit of about 10 alphabetic characters that you could print. So the names didn't amount to much. Maybe you could print nut or washer or something like that. So, but ultimately, of course, within 2 or 3 years, you could print alphabet all the way across. And there was 110, 115 characters. Again, similar to a typewriter, it was limited. Those little individual type bars that would come up. And probably the printers would grind through the cards at, maybe 100 cards a minute, So if you had a fairly good sized deck of cards, it would take 10, 15, 20 minutes to compile that report. And again, go ahead.
Excuse me for the where were you in Building 60 when all this was going on?
Well, at the south end, at the back side of Building 60. In other words, it would have been the south end.
South wing.
I think it was the first. Well, we were in the basement.
You were in the basement.
In the basement.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, at first we were on the first level because it was material control. And that's where material control was it wasn't the basement. They called it the first floor.
Or the lobby floor.
Yeah, the lobby floor. And then ultimately we went downstairs, but that came later.
Okay, but while you had the key punchers, you were still on the second floor?
On the second
floor, the first floor, the lobby floor?
Yeah. And that was strictly material control tab. Well, in the meantime, of course, parts, it got started, Mo Lunsford, with parts department, tabulating.
Similar sort of thing?
Similar sort of thing. And then Clarence Mitchell and oh boy, I was going to tell you his name. Can't think of it now.
That bothered you.
Yeah. No, it wasn't. It just, I'll tip my tongue. But anyway.
It'll come back.
But Clarence Mitchell, they had an accounting tab.
All right.
And They had, so there was at least three tabulating groups.
Which all did similar
All did
functions.
similar functions. They had their own equipment and we had ours. And
Okay.
of course, you can see what's going to come.
Oh, yeah, right. The handwriting's on the wall.
Yeah, handwriting's on the wall. And so then probably, we got pretty sophisticated there we had to wire all the boards, the panels. The collator, you had to specifically wire them for what to do.
Okay.
And they had a big, probably about 30-inch, maybe, 2 foot by 18-inch boards that you plug wires into.
Sort of hardwired.
Hardwired printers. And so you would to get a certain report, you got a certain board, and once they're wired, of course, you didn't tear them down, you just put them in a rack.
You had a little rack you stored all those babies in?
Yeah, that's right. Okay. And we probably, within, a year or two, we probably had 3 or 4 printers. And that was just something else, see those printers crank out those reports. And then the collators and sorters, and ultimately, I think we got up to where we were printing probably, the speed was what was much more as you got sophisticated. IBM, of course, most of it was IBM equipment. It
was that early on? Was mostly all those sorters and printers?
That was the only thing there was at that time. And they'd come out with new printers primarily, and because that was the thing that really that's where you needed the sophistication was to get those printers to run faster. Yeah. So ultimately, you got all alphabetic. You could print alphabet in any one of the 120 characters. There was still a limitation because it was still
however big it could be.
However big it could be, right? And you could store, to a certain extent, you also had the capability in those printers to store information.
They had a little smarts.
So it had a little smarts, and you could read in a header card and store the date or a report name. And this would come out at the heading of each page. And then you had a carriage control tape that you punched up to control the paper. When it got down at the bottom, it would skip up the next page. Okay. And of course, then it would just take over and do that at the end of each, depending on how long the form was.
So there were a little bit of electronics in it.
Electronics, right? There was a sensor there that would sense the hole in the paper tape.
And the memory that you had to remember, like the date or whatever you were remembering, how was that done?
Transistors.
At that time, you were using transistors.
Transistors, yeah.
Wasn't the vacuum tube thing yet?
Well, no, wait a minute. Yeah, that had to come first. Yeah, because I remember now.
I remember a huge vacuum tube machine down there in the basement.
That was still to come. That was the first. Okay. Yeah, these would have been tubes. Yeah, we had, but in the printers, I don't think there's any tubes. They're just a magnetic memory.
It was all it was rather simplistic.
Yeah, really simplistic and electromechanical type thing. Just feed that out each time you trigger a certain impulse from a card going in. Yeah. Okay. Or it would trigger it from the carriage tape that would go around, and there was a certain punch you'd put in there that would trigger that memory.
To put that on
and you had that control all set up in the board to do that every time it sensed that. Actually, a brush, brushes, and of course brushes read all of the holes in the card. And so ultimately, as I say, that got fairly sophisticated, and then I think we started talking about consolidation. Well, that was exciting.
Oh, I can imagine. Everybody was like for or against that.
Well, I'm sure there were both sides, because consolidation always is a means of shake-up, and
right.
But at the first, I think it was just a matter of everybody getting together, and that's when we went downstairs.
Okay.
And I think we went together with accounting, because they were staying in the same building.
Yeah.
See, Mo was still over in the parks.
Yeah, on 62.
Upstairs, 62. See. So accounting and material control kind of merged, and there wasn't too much of a personnel upheaval, because you still had to have a lot of people and key punchers and all that sort of thing. You just utilized them better.
When about would that have been happening, Bob?
That must have been about 1949, I would say.
Okay, just a year or so later.
A year or so later. Because then along about that time, we got in, oh my word, it was a crackerjack machine, a 601 calculator. And we used to explode, what we called explode, the material control parts deck.
Okay.
And what there was, for each part number, we had a master setup that the usage was matrix punched. And that was 5 columns, and then you had 12 punches within each of those columns. So you could store 60 different usages of a part.
Okay.
So we did inventory dispersal with that, or ordering, parts ordering with that thing too, through purchasing. We'd, every week or every so often, we'd get a parts schedule to go out to the vendor. We'd get parts scheduled to go out to the sheet metal plant or the engine plant for parts production.
Okay.
And all based on that MasterCard setup, and each, from engineering, we get all the releases. And somebody translated that then into a punch card, and with this matrix punch in there. And then we had what we called, in order to facilitate that, we had 601s. There was probably about 3 or 4 of those.
Okay.
A new, it was fantastic. Again, you had to hardwire the boards.
Yeah.
Then it came along that in order to, we translate the schedule that was sent down from the scheduling department. I don't know where that would have been. Everybody got together. I know car distribution, and it seemed like they called it the scheduling department at that time. Car production, and how many different kinds of cars, and all of this again went on a matrix sheet, and we had to. There were several people who took that, translated that into these matrix sheets, and they were just 8.5, 11, with the same matrix punch thing that we had in the cards.
Okay.
In other words, you had a 12 punch, an X punch, and a 0 punch. You could run down through 9. So we would have a matrix there with a quantity in that, and then we'd wire those boards with that quantity in this, and the board itself was laid out that same way with a matrix. And then all this did was it had a digital generator that would generate 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 on through 9. So you could duplicate those figures, and then when the card went in to read the matrix of that particular part, the usage, it would read that, and if it got the that certain punch, it generated whatever the quantity of those options were, and but it took 2 or 3 days, to get through a schedule, so-called schedule, because you wired. You started having the assembly plants. What do you call it? BOP? I guess at that time, earlier. BOP plants. So we had to do them for that, and there were several breakdowns, of course, within that master deck. Whether it was assembly usage or this sort of thing.
You sort of did that once a month then?
Yeah, once a month, and then of course it got oftener as schedules changed. They tried to keep on top of things. We put out a supplement schedule.
It would take so long to do it, you couldn't do it every day.
That's right.
Yeah.
Impossible. And so that was the start of really computing, you might say.
Okay, now these devices, now did they start to have some electronic memory in them?
A little more so. Tubes now.
Okay.
See, very, very, very definitely tube memory there. And then I think it was in 1950 that IBM come out with what they called the drum computer, and it would store 2,000 10-digit words.
Isn't that phenomenal?
On a drum about so big around, And again, all you did was electromagnetically store information on that drum, and then you could pick it off every time you went around. Well, this replaced the old 601s. Fantastic. We still use the same idea of a punch matrix, for parts ordering, scheduling, but that was much faster. And of course, that was the first programming. Then you had to program that machine. You didn't. There was some hard wiring.
There wasn't the wiring.
There was some hard wiring. You see, but most of all, then you still read in your program every time from cards.
Oh boy!
And it was a very, very difficult machine language program. You had to. When we first started that, you had to know what the machine said this, or what translated
those.
How it read those. So
now you had hired some guys that understood a little bit about this stuff.
A little bit about that. We started
getting
actually calling them programmers.
Okay.
And that's where I was in on that, And of course, training involved. We went to IBM, out in New York, and
there's schools.
schools. And that was, boy, it was just fascinating. We were on the leading edge, the cutting edge of technology at the time. But then we got an IBM. I don't recall the name of that computer, that first one. I'd have to.
This is the one with all the tubes.
All, tubes and the drum.
Oh,
There's an IBM gave it a number, but I can't recall. But then the next step up was an IBM 305, and I remember that 305 RAMAC.
Oh yeah.
Where arms literally went in and out and read a message in that effect. It was the first disk memory. Very slow, but again,
but it still was a step.
And this then we IBM went into transistors.
Okay.
And
so this was then about 50.
That would have been about 51, 52.
Okay.
We got the RAMAC, it's called their IBM RAMAC in there, and we at that time started thinking of online. That magical term.
Oh yeah.
It was tossed around. Of course, the programming was different. It got a little more sophisticated, so you could. And it's with a stored program that you would read in there. It could take pseudo programming words. In other words, you could actually say X multiply.
Yeah.
And you could say, times. So you actually got into the programming language, and it was, it was a little closer to you than machine language, because they had a program that could store in there and translate that and store that program. So there was a certain amount of that memory had to be allocated, of course, to store the program and to interact with any data that was
the
coming
machines had gotten smart enough now that they could
store their own program,
and they could do some multiplying and dividing,
and
some more
fantastic.
calculations,
and searching,
so if you had to go find something, they could go find that.
Right. And so still a lot of punch cards. Still hadn't got a.
That was the data input.
Yeah, the
Still
data input, right?
Was that
and
way.
all the programs, of course, had to be punched. Anything that went into that still had to be punched.
Now, all of this was still down in the first.
Still down in the basement now.
Basement of 60.
Yeah. And I think along about that time, 52, maybe 53, 54, I'm not sure that. I think parts finally came over.
I remember a huge vacuum tube machine sitting in that south room. It seems like along the east wall.
They're in the basement?
In the basement.
Yeah, that's probably the 305. 305
I remember
RAMAC.
looking at all of the tubes glowing at me.
Okay, all right. That was the next step up.
Oh, that's the next
That's
step.
the next step
all
up.
Right.
A central processor. Yeah, central processor. Again, then you had, with this RAMAC, there wasn't any auxiliary things. Oh, you had a card reader and a card punch. But not too much else. I don't think he even had a keyboard at the time. I don't recall on RAMAC. But then,
how big a thing was that?
Oh, RAMAC probably. It was probably as big as this two sections right
so
here.
It's like 8 or 10 feet long.
Yeah,
4
with
feet,
all the tubes, and I think it was probably higher. Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, that's when they started worrying about air conditioning.
Oh yeah. It was getting hot down there.
Getting hot down there. And then the next step up was. Still IBM, probably with the central processor, and with memory, and of course here more use of fancier transistors and all the other things. I don't know when they ultimately got to. Oh boy, it would be down the line where they finally got to the little chips.
It was a long time until they got to the full solid state stuff.
Full solid state. Yeah, it was quite a while. Yeah, those again were still tubes.
Okay.
With some transistors, of course, along with it.
This would have been like 53.
Probably 53, I would say. 53, 54, yeah. And I think we had two of them at the time. Ultimately, get one in, and of course, programming became more, important.
Yeah.
Set up the programs to write them. I was still involved with programming, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and. I don't recall.
Who? Excuse me, Bob. I keep backing up.
That's all right.
Who was the kind of the boss of the overall thing at that juncture?
Harold Brown.
Harold Brown.
Brownie?
Yes. Oh yes.
Yeah. He and oh dear. Harold Blow.
Okay.
Harold Blow came into material control. He took Bill Wilcox's place.
All right.
Bill died or retired.
Yeah.
I think he passed away or retired. I'm not sure which. Harold Blow took that in. And in fact, Harold come in while we were still up there in material control on the first floor.
First floor.
Yeah.
Okay. Now,
And
when
so
you
Brownie.
combined it with the accounting guys,
Yeah.
was it still Brownie?
Still Brownie, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he kind of ran the whole
Right.
accounting and the
That's-
materials
yeah, that's
bunch.
right.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we had to start keeping track of time spent. You know, we had to
Oh,
think
yeah.
of this accounting of our time because it was
Okay.
accounting this.
Prorating. So to
Prorating,
speak.
right,
Uh-huh.
there you go. Mhm. Of the, of the resources there,
Mm-hmm.
people especially. And we filled out job cards, we had to set up a
Okay.
job code that was charged to a certain department. So that was when we first started, allocating
Mhm.
the data processing resources there.
Remember anything about how big your budgets were or any of that kind of stuff? Or did-
Not till, now,
Later.
of course, Brownie, yeah,
Yeah.
ultimately I got
All
into
right.
budgets
All
more.
right. Yeah. Wait
Yeah.
till we get there.
Yeah. And, Brownie, and, oh boy, big, tall guy that smoked a pipe. I was still trying to get his name out of here. That was over counting. And he was over Clarence Mitchell. Oh boy, it's terrible. Well, I
That's
still can't
okay.
think of it.
Yeah.
But,
Okay.
so ultimately then,
Yeah.
parts came over, got in,
when
their people.
would that have been?
Probably, it must have been about 54, 55.
All right.
I can't be positive on that.
Now, all their folks came over that
All
were
their folks
fiddling
came
with it
over,
too.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Now, did you still all reside in that one spot?
yeah,
Did you
we
all
still-
fit in there?
oh yeah, we had to start moving down the hallways,
All right.
in
So
the
you
basement
squirted
floor.
down that
Oh, yeah.
narrow corridor.
You're right,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Okay.
Make more room for programming and for
Mhm.
key punch, a larger key punch.
Yeah.
And then, oh boy, just I can't recall now when the next, real important 55. Well, when did we move out of 70 or
Oh,
out of 60?
That wasn't until 60,
Well, okay.
66
Oh, yeah.
or something,
Yeah,
64,
yeah.
66, somewhere in
That's
there.
right. It would-
So you had another 8 or 10
Yeah,
years,
8 or
you were
10
still
years.
down there.
Yeah, still down there. And
But now, didn't
yep.
you ultimately, did you get the whole basement eventually?
Just about, because you
Seems
see,
like you had
accounting
in the north wing, didn't you?
accounting had the north wing. I
Yeah.
think. Well, they were still there, separate in the north wing of the
Okay,
basement, and so we had both wings.
all right.
Now there was still, and that would have been about the time that. Well, I think all three of them consolidate. And I guess we didn't take over anything before we moved downstairs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Accounting.
You
I don't-
stayed separated.
Stayed separated.
All right.
We moved downstairs and they were downstairs. I don't know whether they moved down there. Yeah, that's right. So ultimately the whole accounting or the whole data processing, tabulating
Yeah.
would have been downstairs there in that basement.
Okay.
Between accounting. And then it would have been probably, like I say, probably 54, 55, 50, somewhere along in there that parts would have come over. And ultimately of course, that old equipment, was gone out. And we still had, a few sorters, 2 or 3 sorters.
Yeah.
And then I don't recall now the next big, move as far as computer transition. Boy, it happened fast. It seemed like, you wouldn't be more than a year and a half and IBM had come out with a new thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, GM wanted to stay on the front of that.
Yeah.
So we
When did we start? See, did accounting handle the checks? Were they handled there?
Well, hourly pay or salary payroll still, yeah, they handled the salary payroll or hourly payroll.
Uh-huh.
Accounting handled the hourly payroll checks.
Okay.
Now,
Now,
Bryce Hill still had a little tab group upstairs for salary,
salary
but he would eventually come down and run his stuff on our equipment.
Okay.
Of course, very hush hush,
Yeah.
bringing stuff down.
Yeah.
But so yeah, that would have been along about there 55, 58. I don't recall.
Now, prior to
Yeah.
that time, then the checks, prior to computers, checks were done in an entirely different manner, I guess.
Oh yeah, they were
They were
done.
done sort of with manual machinery or just
Well,
mechanical
yeah,
stuff.
I think they ultimately ran them on about the second or third generation of printers.
Uh-huh.
They finally got that switched over because I remember the big checks, and then we had picking tickets. I don't know whether used to for material control
Yeah,
to pick and
yeah,
ship
sure,
to
yeah.
to the assembly plants. So the checks were written down there too, as I recall. Checks and check stubs were all. And then we had a burster and sorter and declator, you know, and the auxiliary equipment that went along with that. So yeah, the checks were written down there, hourly payroll checks, and then we got a 2 or 3 burros, and that shook IBM up. Oh boy!
Okay. So we broke with IBM.
Broke with IBM, not not entirely.
Yeah.
But Burroughs had come out with some pretty good equipment. I got involved with evaluating some of the new equipment.
All right.
And went to Burroughs, you know, and
this time-wise, when would this have been?
This must have been probably you were getting along about 58, 59, 60, I would imagine. And then of course IBM kept coming along with updated versions of those big mainframes that you were talking about, the big tubes and transistors and that. And boy, I couldn't tell you when that break came, but I remember carrying in my desk drawer this new solid state thing.
This little chip?
Yeah, only it was a little bigger at the time. Well, they had cards, you know, circuit cards that did a whole host of things. They got away from pretty much anything, you know, tubes and transistors and that sort of thing.
And the circuit cards would have had little resistors and things on them?
Resistors,
you could see
thermistors. I remember that term. I don't know what it means, but yeah, you can see the printed circuits. And they just take a card out and put one back in. And of course, like I say, that it increased the speed, and you got additional memory.
Yeah.
You were talking thousands of digits of memory, you know, at that time. And access time was a matter of milliseconds, you know, thousands of a second.
My goodness.
Yeah. And now what they talk about, picoseconds, billions, whatever it is.
Bob, how big would those machines have been from the standpoint of storage? Any remembrances of that?
Well, I know they equated this. You know, you'd have to have about like the 305 Ramex. You'd have to have about 10 of those in order to do the work of this new machine, of course. So that's about the only way.
So you really didn't have like a 2 megabyte or a 10 megabyte?
No,
or
not at that
time. They didn't talk about that sort of stuff.
Not yet. Yeah. Not till you really got into that, you know,
the little chips.
Little chips, yeah. And but again, thousandths of a second. That was that was real speed.
What did the Burroughs machines do that you were working on?
They were a combination computer, and then they have a printer tied in with them, so that you didn't have to worry about reading cards in and that sort of thing. So, boy, what was that? That was a Burroughs. What did they call that? Can't recall.
But most data was still being put in with cards.
With cards, right? I'm not sure on that. When we switched to, what would have been? Boy, it was cards for a long time.
Yeah. But you were cards in 70, I know, initially.
Yeah, we still were. It wasn't until we went to, you know, onto tapes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was, like you say, in the 70s, certainly.
So the storage in the machine was somewhat limited, then, wasn't it?
Right.
As far as its capacity.
Yeah. And you still had to handle quite a few cards. So we still had, well, even when I left, I know we still had sorters, collators, 2 or 3 of them, you know, to handle card systems for the smaller systems.
Yeah.
So, that, in fact, I wouldn't be surprised there's still something like that around there. I don't know.
Somewhere stashed away.
Yeah. Very well could be. Yeah. Oh, dear.
Well, now, ultimately, then, all of that, you went through the process year by year, sort of improving and upgrading and going through that. And eventually we moved over to building 70.
Yeah. Do you recall when we actually went under accounting, all the data processing or tabulating?
Yeah. When I don't know. I could probably find that. I've got.
I don't recall a date on that.
Org charts.
Yeah.
I can eventually find that
that's
there.
where that would show.
Okay.
And
but you guys, until then, were still
under material control.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure that that happened while we were still in building 60.
60.
To go under accounting and become fully consolidated.
Yeah.
Because it just made sense.
Yeah.
So, and then, like I say, there were probably, we would gotten in building 70, when you say about
About
60?
66.
66,
Yeah.
okay, all right. All right, I remember that, we talk about of course, we had the problems with cables as you got more auxiliary equipment that was tied into the
Mhm.
mainframes. Why you had to have all those big cables, laid
Right.
around the floor. And we had to build tunnels,
Yeah.
or ramps over them.
Yeah.
So when we talked about going into building 70, why, with that raised floor and everything under the floor, and all air conditioning, boy, that just whet our appetite.
Like heaven.
Yeah, yeah, it was something else.
Mhm.
Really great. And then, like I say, we a lot of computer models,
Yeah.
IBM 360, the IBM
Yeah.
3600, the IBM.
One away.
Yeah,
Practically.
you're about right. Yeah. Just onward and forward. And then, of course, you get more and more online stuff. More as more storage came along, and this would probably have been about, certainly. Well, of course, we were then that before we moved in 70, they were down to the print, or not printed circuit, but the what do I say, solid state.
Okay.
And that must have been 60, well, 65, 66, I don't know,
Mhm.
before we moved into
Mhm.
there, because we had all this new equipment all ordered, and it was all solid state at that time. And as you got more online stuff, the tape drives, of course, had to be tied into the computer. We had disk memory, of course, more and more that came. That
No,
became
we
more and more
didn't have much of the, what I'll call the desktop crap at that time.
No.
Nobody had a little
right.
thing on their desk in the 60s.
No.
They just, nobody sat there, could fiddle.
No, that's right.
Okay.
See, I think what kind of brought that about to some extent was ultimately going from keying to cards, keying to either onto disk or
Mhm.
or tape.
Mhm.
And that showed that, we don't need this consolidated key punch or data entry as it was. And so that was kind of the start of it. Put a terminal out there, and as phone lines became sophisticated, the machine itself became, and you had an operating system that would let these. And when I say an operating system, a program
Mhm.
that was very well, IBM sold the programs,
Mhm.
to handle all of that. And then you wrote programs that would do specific applications, but it would handle it online, input or output. I'll never forget Ken Mix. He wanted a printer over there in that parts plant.
Okay.
He wanted a printer. It was online. He wanted to get in the modern world.
Right. Uh-huh.
And so we said, okay, you can have a printer over there, and that was tied in. That was, well, say fairly early.
Sure. That was
in the
59
adventure.
we built that plant.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So sometime shortly thereafter would have been.
Must have been,
Yeah.
yeah. And that was a, fairly good, fairly fast printer that would handle his output,
Yeah.
print his picking tickets in effect.
Mhm.
So he could go, up
Yeah.
the bin. And well, again, the progress there, it became fast and furious, it seemed like. That's when I really enjoyed going to work. You know what I mean? You have those days.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I enjoyed all the rest of it because there was so much change.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Never a dull moment.
No, like I said, back in about 50, 51, I became a programmer.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
That was great.
I was in heaven.
Yeah.
I just loved that. And
Well,
I think
now,
it was about,
you personally then kind of moved through the ranks a little bit.
right.
So take me through where you ended up personally.
Well,
You were in this programming position.
programming after the the consolidation down there in the basement.
Yeah.
I think we had 3-shift operation going at the time,
Okay.
of course, to keep those things going. And from programming, you got involved with some systems work. You'd sit down with the customer and say, now, what do you want to do?
Okay.
Whoever it was.
Mhm.
And so you got involved with that. And so, that broadened a person,
Sure.
you became familiar with old systems,
Mhm.
what was going on out there. And then when there were problems, why, they'd come to the guy that programmed it,
Sure.
So it put you in a limelight
Yeah.
to some extent.
Mhm.
And so that was kind of I enjoyed that. And probably I moved up, in classification, I don't know what it was, 4 or 5,
Yeah.
that sort of thing, back when they had those. And I think, see, I'm not sure. I think that I was on supervision before we went over into the new building.
Okay.
So, as you know, day shift operations supervisor.
All right.
And
So you
of
had
course, Cantine and Mitchell were still there, and Mo
Okay.
was still there.
All
You
right.
see, and
they each had separate.
they had separate
Groups.
entities, yeah, groups. And of course, Brownie was still over that. Under, of course, at that time it would have been. Oh, who was the comptroller?
Sean.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah,
Real Sean, probably.
right? Probably him. And I don't know who came in after him.
Let's see, Elliot, maybe?
Yeah,
Dick
Dick Elliott. Dick Elliott. That's who I remember more.
Okay, because he
Yeah.
was.
I think it was
in the
Elliott
50s
that when we
came in.
consolidated and became accounting again,
Okay.
as I recall.
Okay.
And so it was probably, I'd have to look back at some of my records. You could find out.
Oh, yeah.
When I went on to supervision, but oh boy, that was something else. You know, I guess the highlight, and it still stands out. I was, it was great to become a supervisor, but that company car,
Oh, yeah.
and I'll never forget that. Ronnie says, come on, we're going. It was after he got into building 70.
yeah.
I don't know what year, probably about, I think I went on supervision in, maybe it was before 60. I'm not sure now.
Uh-huh.
It may have been later than that. So, but then we were in the new building, and Brownie says, we're going to take you to lunch. That's great. And at lunch, he handed me the keys to a company car.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, I called my wife. Oh, boy, this was just fantastic. Company car. Get to park.
Oh, yes, right. Right there next to the
golly,
plant.
Jim,
Oh, yeah, right.
But, so, and see, then, well, I would have become probably a general supervisor.
Yeah.
Before that, I'm
Yeah,
sure. And
yeah.
again, I don't
Yeah,
know
that's-
just what year it was.
Must have been cost the car.
Yeah, right. And then, I think,
How many,
go
excuse
ahead.
me again,
yeah,
back when
Sure.
you first became that supervisor back over in 60, how many people would you had working for you? Like, can you remember about?
well, they, at that time, if just first supervisor,
First line
probably, well, what, 15, 20 people. And I think I had the key punch, as I recall.
Okay,
No, here we go. Charlie Drum,
all right.
when he come out of Warranty.
Mhm.
Warranty had a tab group.
Sales,
There we
yeah.
go.
Right.
Warranty had a tab group. I'd forgotten about that. And now when
Okay, go back to,
yeah, Charlie Drum then would have been data prep or key punch supervisor.
and then what did you have then?
Then I had the operations,
You
day
had-
shift operations. And as I recall, then I had under Brownie, I think I had Kenny Broadberg and Clarence Cantine,
Okay,
and also Clarence Mitchell. Well, no, that would have come later.
all right.
But I think I had the afternoon and midnight shift there in building 60 that was still,
Okay.
and kind of a, it was a day shift supervisor, but I was still had to kind of keep track of
The nights and the midnights.
nights and midnights, yeah.
And you were operations.
Operations, right.
Running the
Right,
machinery.
running
so to speak.
machinery. And of course, got out of the programming as such. Well, you'd still get involved
Yeah.
with that sort of thing too, because I guess it's partly because I enjoyed it so
Yeah.
much. And but I enjoyed the supervision, and
What kind of,
Yeah.
in those days, you must have had things go haywire like they do today. What
Oh,
kinds of,
you
can you
better
remember
believe
back to things that just, what kinds of typical
Oh.
things went haywire in the early days?
well, somebody wired the board wrong,
Yeah,
and then you didn't know which board it was. There was something that didn't happen only once in a blue moon. One of those
Yeah.
things. Well, that particular glitch with the select programs now, you got a bug. You had a bug in
Yeah.
even in the wiring of the boards. You'd have a bug.
somebody
wouldn't
got
have-
plugged in the wrong
Yeah,
place.
plugged the wrong way, and you didn't detect that until It's still a really goof. And then you had to search, go back, sit down. Well, now where did it happen? Pinpoint the thing, and then pinpoint the problem, and then who wired the board. Not that you were ready to
No,
kick them out, but
just
anyway, you want to know.
fix it.
Yeah, fix it. And quite often, those things, those bugs, would happen, and you'd have to call a person in, and even on afternoon or call them in to fix
Yeah.
that thing because it had to run that night.
Did you ever have
So-
cards just go
Oh,
all over the place?
Oh yeah, yeah, and tapes that got as we got into tapes,
Yeah.
cards that were always rather sure. I mean, you tear up a few of them,
Yeah.
and you'd have some problems with being missorted.
Okay.
Uh,
But you didn't have big piles of them flying all over the room or that
no,
sort of thing.
that wasn't really a problem. It was just those hidden things that just all of a sudden would up, and you'd have a finished report, so called, but it wasn't right.
Words all off or something.
Words
lined
all
up.
off. Yeah, that's right. And you'd see that, and then you'd have to start backtracking. Well, you've done a lot of work, and of course, you didn't always start over, but you had to do. In other words, if you did it right in the first place, well, that's always
Same
easy.
old story.
Same old story,
Yeah.
right? So that was, and again, we tried to emphasize that on supervision. Tried to emphasize, get it right. And of course, if you recall, key punch, we always verified.
Yes.
Everything was punched, and then it went to a verifier.
Doubled it, sort of.
Right.
Yeah.
And they were still doing that, of course, even on tapes. They wanted to make sure the input, at least.
Mhm.
So usually we're fairly sure of that. Although I suppose there were still problems there. Once in a while, somebody didn't read the number right,
Yeah.
and it was a 7. It was supposed to have been something else.
Yeah.
But both bureaus would read it wrong. That not happened too much. But more problems with the bugs in the programs. I don't think cards as such gave us that much of a problem, really. It was more, as we got more sophisticated, the program itself just didn't handle that particular situation. Somebody had, either we didn't get it in the first system setup, that this could happen.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden it does, and it kind of filters all the way through the thing and spoils the whole pie. It could have, and quite often that happened. We'd be rerun schedules. Oh boy, I tell you, we get them up to purchasing, and what's this, And of course, it got to be a joke. Get to be a joke. Oh, it was pathetic. So we really tried, again, quality control.
How about when the tube type machines that you had there?
Oh,
How
they're
did you
defective.
maintain those? I mean, did you have guys plugging in tubes all the time, or how?
Oh
Did
yeah,
you do that?
IBM was always there. They had 3 or 4
Oh, did
customer
they?
engineers.
They were
there.
right on
oh,
site.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and on call, even during the night.
Oh.
Something like that.
Uh-huh.
Way back it would have been tubes,
Yeah.
transistors, and then ultimately it was the cards,
Yeah.
the printed circuit cards.
Well, did they have a maintenance regimen that they
Oh,
would
yes.
go through?
Oh,
And they
very
would
much
change
so.
tubes.
Yeah,
on a
they
regular
put a
basis?
machine down
Uh-huh.
for preventive maintenance.
Mhm.
Yeah, they did that very much so.
Yeah.
All the way through this.
Okay.
Not quite as much with although they would take a sorter even,
Mhm.
pull it apart and, redo it.
Okay.
The rollers would wear, and the brushes and the little knives that, stepped up and
Yeah.
put the card in the right pocket. You'd have that sort of thing. So there was always preventive maintenance going on. And then ultimately, of course, with their programs weren't always that free. In other words, what we call the operating program.
Yeah.
That you just had to bury that in the machine and to interface with the application programs.
Mhm.
And then ultimately you got operating systems, which is what CMP and some of these fancy names.
Yeah.
And so that became more of the problem. There was still bugs in those. We rented those, or else we could later on. I think we were
Mhm.
buying them,
Mhm.
the programs themselves from IBM, and that way we could modify them if we
Wanted to.
wanted
cool
to.
them.
Yeah. Mhm. So it was, and there was still, of course, the preventive maintenance on the machines themselves. Mechanical, and there was still the tape drives,
Yeah.
the arms on the disc,
Yeah.
and you still had printers. Although, see, I was trying to think. Ultimately,
You got away from the mechanical.
yeah, there was electronic with the jet sorters,
the dots, the
yeah,
two
dots,
little
dot
dot
matrix
matrices,
dot things, right? And but again, there were still mechanical
Mhm.
problems with that they would maintain. preventive maintenance, and also if there was a breakdown. And of course, that some once in a while was a big problem. You know, you get something out and a certain letter or a certain number wasn't coming out right, that sort of thing. So it would be a machine problem. We always tried to pin the machine problem. That was the easy thing to do.
Right. The program was the problem.
Program, you know, that was the problem. So yeah, that was pretty typical, you know. So as I say, the biggest blow-ups were ultimately as we got into programming, and that something wasn't taken care of in the original layout of the system. You know, it didn't do all it was supposed to do, or else it was being modified, and somebody tried to, you know, change it to make it run better. That was always a kind of a underlying thing. I can make this program run faster if I do this. You know, see, a routine that I can take out of improvements, right? So there was constantly that sort of thing going on with our own programmers, and of course with IBM. And ultimately, programming was, you're talking 35, 40 programmers, I think, at the heyday.
Yeah.
And then, of course, ultimately, I got my career-wise, after getting to Building 70 there, I didn't do any more programming. And still, of course, on supervision. And then we flipped back and forth. I had Charlie Drum had operations, and then I had programming. And then I don't think he ever went into, programming at all. But then I switched back only from, I had the data prep and programming. And at that time, the back end of Building 70 there with all those cubicles, you know.
Yeah, those are all the programmers set.
All the programmers set. Like I say, there was probably 35 or 40.
And you had all the key punchers too?
All the key punchers too.
Okay.
At that time. Then, Earl Hamilton came to the picture.
Oh, yeah.
Personnel-wise.
I remember.
I think after Brownie, probably after Brownie retired, about the time he retired, as I recall. And, of course, Dick Havens was there.
Yeah.
And then ultimately I went from operations. I still had on to data prep with Margaret Redding and you know, the gals there, and went into the administration end of the data processing, budgets, and chargebacks,
all that good
and
stuff.
working with Murphy.
When would that have been?
This must have been. Well, I probably had that about 70. 71, 72. See, I left at 70, 79.
You retired in 79.
Retired in 79.
Okay.
And got involved, and that was interesting. Really enjoyed that, and worked with Bill real closely, Bill Murphy, on budgets, and then you get the input every month from accounting, and you see how you did actually against your, you know, against the budgets, and try to make the charges. And then we still use the job codes to charge back programming, key punch, the whole thing. And of course, we had chargeback rentals or the total expenses. We were a zero, you know, we had to end up with zero money.
Service group.
Yep, service group. So that was interesting to try to make those, you know, figures agree. And then, of course, go through the yearly thing of budgets and new people. And then I got involved with the projects where you had to come in and you had to sell, you know, you being the customer, you remember, you had to come in and sell it to Bill Murphy and the DP committee.
Yeah.
That went on for, 7, 8 years, I think, before I left.
You know, was that the DP committee, was that an Earl Hamilton sort of thing? Or
He was involved with that. I think it was before that even.
Okay.
Yeah, it was before that, because I remember Brownie and I worked pretty closely with that. And I, again, had charge of putting together. We had a form and several forms, of course, to explain the system, the savings. You know, always you had to come up with savings, or else a doggone good reason, you know, it just had to be. Ultimately, it was government regulations, you know.
Well, some of them were.
Some of them were, So, and that was, usually tried to have a meeting once a month, and we try to get took over from Elliot.
Oh, Bo.
Yeah, right, Ed Bo. Try to get him. Of course, you're supposed to have a staff level person there on data processing from each of the staff, sales and
manufacturing and so forth.
Yeah, manufacturing. And that was interesting. I enjoyed that, putting together those proposals. And you had to keep track of them, whether they'd been approved or where they're at. And then each proposal had to have a charge. In other words, ultimately, we kept time against that proposal. And equipment, of course, you had to talk about equipment rental that was going in, and ultimately, of course, we talked about all of these terminals. Then, you're talking that probably about 1971, 72, 73. That's
when
terminals.
we started to get the influx of terminals.
And then I was involved with the inventory of all the equipment. You had to take, for GM, you had to take an annual inventory of all the equipment. Well, that'd get me out in the plant, see where all this equipment was. It was interesting. And machine number so-and-so, terminal number so-and-so, And of course, ultimately, we got even that on the computer because, boy, just too much to manually take care of that.
Yeah.
And the rental had to be charged back to them. And of course, that was all part of the budget.
Yeah.
So you took all this and we tried to set up, it was difficult to prorate computer time because you're running several programs in that computer all at once.
Jumping in and out.
Yeah, jumping in and out, yeah. So we prorate that, try to figure out a prorate, how long it took. And the programmer and setting it up, he say, well, it's supposed to take so many minutes, so we'd use that as the estimate, how long it would take to actually program it. Programming time had to go into that proposal. And then any people. Then, of course, it comes the budget. We'd say, well, this proposal, was approved, and we then should have 3 more people.
Oh, yeah.
Well, try to get them. That was always a problem.
Okay.
And it got worse as we went along because, boy, they really put the clamps on it. And then I got involved with, the last about 3 or 4 years with data security and physical security of the computer room.
Was that less of a problem in the early, or less thought of in the early days?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Nobody even worried about that.
Yeah. But then GM got I guess it was, industry wide.
Yeah.
What would you do if you had so much information on those computers and tapes and discs, what would you do? Well, my biggest frustration at that point was to go back to, let's say, accounting and say, well, now, what kind of records do you want us to keep? How far back should we go? How many tapes? Well, we were trading tapes back and forth with Buick, or, we'd put them off site somewhere. And we talked about a place there at I don't know if we ever got one or not, where we stored critical tapes, for a certain length of time and then replaced them with something else, master tapes, whatever. Especially in accounting, I think, and warranty, we had to store warranty information. Up comes stone.
A lot of legal stuff.
We had to store that. So there was that sort of thing. And then, of course, it got where the keyboards were so, all out in the plant. Then you had to set up a system to identify yourself if you came on that keyboard. And so we had to have a data security system. And that had to go into the computer itself, of course, to keep unwarranted people out, supposedly, And then physical security worked pretty close with plant security.
Fire marshal.
Yeah.
Hoffman.
And
oh dear, who was the guy preceded him?
Yeah, I can't tell you his name now.
I think of Nick Kiefer, but that wasn't the one. It was after him.
Yeah.
Anyway,
he was Lansing. He was the Lansing police or something, wasn't he? Husby. There we go. Daryl Husby. Yeah. So we're close to him, and then never. Well, there was some. We finally got the doors closed there at Building 7. You had to have a combination, and of course we had combinations into the computer room itself. And ultimately, we set up the distribution station, where you came and got your reports.
Right.
Because, he said those reports shouldn't just get to anybody. Well, so that was part of it.
Well, when did that part of the thing sort of start happening?
Probably about, I would say, about 4 years, about 74, 73, 74, that they really, and then I was made data security officer. But I don't know. Anyway,
that sort of thing.
And then I had to meet with different people from other divisions. What are you doing? The meetings on security, and that got to be a pain because you had to put together a so-called disaster recovery plan, and it had to be on file. Well, it was on paper. It was on paper, and we had some things that we were doing, but what would you literally do if the place blew up?
Yeah, you lost everything.
Yeah. It got beyond that, and I don't really know what they're doing now.
Yeah,
as far as that sort of
out for a while.
Yeah, the idea. But
But then,
Yeah.
so in the early days, the only kind of security people worried about was like the check business. When the
Yeah,
guy
that's right.
came down with a check, she was
That's
kind
for
of
sure.
hush
Yeah,
hush. And that.
yeah. And ultimately, of course, even up till I left their salary payroll, they would come down and run. They'd bring their own cards down. They still had cards. They'd
Yeah.
bring them down, and Bryce and John Farron and John Morrow and
Yeah.
you know some of those guys up there come down and run, you know, that on our equipment, and they
Yeah.
stood there until it was, and we'd put a
Kind of guarded.
yeah, oh yeah.
Uh-huh.
We used to get involved with some personnel and salary
Yeah.
information, and they
Yeah.
put something over the printer, you know. Yeah, which is you know, it's
Really?
fine.
Okay.
So, but I think that's the thing that was more frustrating to me, not to be able to really get things together and come up with that, with what I figured was a good disaster recovery plan, because it was just something that I put down on paper and yeah, are you really going to do this? Well, you know better than that, you know, they'd ask you that. But I thoroughly enjoyed that up till the last probably 2 years. It was just fascinating, and I loved working with people. I remember I kept track of all the birthdays. I'd have a little punch card deck, and I just you know that was my contribution to personnel relations. You know, and it worked beautifully. I'd go and say, having a birthday today. Well, how'd you know that?
I got shot punch cards.
Yeah. Well, I told him, you know, I just said, well, I was interested enough just to, and it gave me a chance to, you know, get out and interface with someone.
How about your bosses? Who did you have that? Who kind of sticks in your mind as?
Well, Brownie was the beautiful guy.
What kind of a guy was Brownie?
Oh my word, he just was a. I'll never forget though. One time there in the other building, we were working overtime, working our butts off, you know, trying to get some schedules out. And I was kind of a pseudo leader, you know, it wasn't supervision yet, but I said, yeah, well, go to Schlappi, you know, he'll get something for you. Well, I'll never forget, we were working overtime there when I don't remember, schedule had gone wrong and we had to come back in, you know, and redo it. And Bob England and some of those other guys, he was a needler. But I enjoyed Bob. I think he's a great guy. But he could needle. Oh, he could just needle you, you know. And so he got to me at one time, and as far as I know, he and I were there. And I says, well, something's got to happen. And if Harold Brown don't get on the stick and do something, just about that time I look over my shoulder there, Brownie. Well,
they crawled under a wastebasket.
Yeah. I knew he'd heard me, you know. I apologized. Really just upset, you know. I just had to explode. Yeah. So he understood. But I think Brownie on the plus side. Yeah. And
how did he manage people?
Very, very. I want to say, on a personal basis, he didn't always come out and. Well, it took quite a bit to really get Brownie to say, well, you dumb so-and-so.
Oh, yeah.
Why didn't you do it this way? He'd go a long ways. So, and yet, he interfaced well with the other departments too, you know. Brownie had a kind of a line, you know, he loved to talk about fishing, you know, and that sort of thing. And just to sit down and talk with him personally on an interview, I always had to bug Brownie, well, when am I going to get my interview? Well, yeah, we'll get at that, you know. So it was that type of thing. But Brownie still, you knew where you stood with him. It wasn't that, but easygoing, very much so. And then I've enjoyed working with Bill Murphy. Okay. He was a principal guy. He took a lot of flack from both sides because he was in direct charge of data processing under Vogt, you say. And of course, he had 2 or 3 other areas there in accounting too. But Bill was just always a gentleman, the prince. You know, he stands out as really somebody that you could just believe what he said, and you knew, just what he was thinking, what he wanted.
How did he manage folks? What did he do that made you like him so much?
Well, I think he gave you enough leeway, you know. Well, now what do what do you think, Bob? Can we do it this way? And let's put it together. And then you know, if something didn't come out the way he thought, and again, you knew you were kind of bouncing things off of him because you knew then how Ed Volk was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a good when I say interlocutor, I mean, you know,
Mm-hmm.
in between guy there. Not all that, you know, he was sympathetic, but he could be hard.
Mm-hmm.
Bill probably leaned toward the other way like Brownie did. He didn't want to really hurt anybody,
Mm-hmm.
but he, you know, he would get to the heart of things. He would get to the heart of things, as I recall. And so that to me was the impression that he left with me. And yet he ran it pretty well. I think you'd find that probably with the other people who were working with him too.
How about, did you deal with Schoen at all directly?
No, that was pretty much a brief time there before Schoen left.
How about Dick Elliott? Did you?
Oh
deal with him?
yeah, we were pretty. I thought Dick did Dick kind of stayed out of it.
Okay.
He let Bill handle that pretty much. Dick was a quieter guy
Mm-hmm.
than Volt, of course.
Yes.
When we heard that Volt was coming, we kind of shook in our boots.
Really?
Oh yeah, and I don't suppose the image changed a great deal. And
he was true to what you expected.
Yeah, true to it. And he didn't want to get that close, he wanted maybe enough detail so he'd, understand what happened if there was a blow up. And go and correct it, tell the guy to, and he, once in a while, I think maybe go off the deep end a little bit and get a little too involved perhaps. But yeah, he just a little more, well, not as much tact, I'm sure of that. I didn't ever think all that great about Ed Volt, but I never had any real personal problems, or anything like that.
How about you folks had to deal a lot with guys and other staffs?
Oh yeah, sales,
manufacturing, so forth.
Primarily through car distribution, and then of course the warranty.
Yeah.
That was still that's really was that sales?
No, well, yeah,
just his own department.
It would have been. I don't know when it ultimately was part of the sales organization.
That's right.
I don't know whether it was separate initially.
Yeah, and then of course engineering. We a big link there was Dick Hill and I can't think of the other guy's name. And because they had online systems, and but Dick Hill, he was representative on the from the engineering staff. Usually he sat in on the DP meetings.
Okay.
And he's quite knowledgeable with data processing because they had their own little system over there too.
But did you guys have any what I'll call direction disagreements between what I'll call staffs? Like
yes.
Like you folks thought we should go this way and somebody else thought we should go that way. What kinds of those things came along that
usually it came along after these proposals were made.
All right.
Because they would sit there and they didn't rubber stamp them all.
Okay.
Even though it was for the engineering department, sales would get in the act and vice versa, that sort of thing. Reliability, of course, at the time was they started being a big user, and Jim Fuller was prime guy that I dealt with a lot, and 2 or 3 others out there I can't think of the names, but and of course they sit on these DP meetings, and but there would be some pretty sharp questioning, and of course ultimately they always come back to cost and savings.
Okay.
And,
so those were basically the determiners of what direction we went.
That's right. And then there was a few times when then it was a matter of prioritizing the proposals. Well, because we'd have several, and you only had so many resources, programming resources.
Yes.
When can you allocate a program for this? Well, it's going to be 6 months. Oh no. Well, then somebody set up a different priority for us, which is all right. I mean, we said, well, what do you want to back off on? So there was some prioritizing within that group also as a DP committee, and direction then given to us. Because again, we were just performing a service, and there were some things shot down or refused, and that went in the file, not the round file, but I mean, that was to hold, because it could have come up again.
Yeah.
And I don't know where it'd be interesting. I don't know how many proposals, you'd get. They had to be a certain size anyway. In other words, some of these, I think it had to be, first it was a few thousand,
Yeah.
in order to hit the DP committee. Then I think they raised that, you're talking 10, 15, 20,000,
Mhm.
and then of course it was people, they got a lot more attention. You're talking about people on, so there was a lot of those. Come on.
What one thing do you think over all that period of time stands out in your mind as maybe perhaps the major step that we took in that arena? Because you kind of lived through the whole, what I will call the whole happening of the computer.
It was again the scheduling of parts for purchasing department, putting out and ultimately we got to do that every week because they wanted that way. Yeah,
see that as being the
one of the
major
early
step forward that
yes,
we
right.
made.
Yeah, that's right. And you'd actually put out a release to the vendor.
Yeah.
And there was 5 copies, and of course, the person would keep one. They'd actually mail one to the vendor. Hopefully, they'd get it down where they could just separate those and mail them. Well, once in a while, a boo-boo would get out to even the vendor. Yeah. But that was one of the big systems. And then probably, I guess I was always comfortable with accounting. You knew just what was going to happen there. That wasn't a big deal.
Yeah.
Any of the accounting principles or deals we had.
Sort of 2 plus 2.
Yeah. That wasn't any big system. In fact, they didn't have a lot of online systems anyway with accounting. Usually batch processing. But then reliability was another big system that we had. Of course, a lot of terminals and quite a few problems because it was difficult to define and then to bring that. And then it related to warranty. See, reliability was related to warranty. Yes. So, and warranty again was another large system that I recall was a very complex thing. All those warranty claims, and you had certain timing on them. You had to check that and check to see if this was a first or second time around for that claim to come in. All those sorts of things, and of course, then you worked very closely with a GM warranty group, down at wherever it was, Detroit somewhere. Office, yeah. And then reliability, same way. You worked very closely with the GM reliability group.
Now, those were things that kind of all happened in the late 60s and early 70s.
Right, early 70s. Okay. Probably the biggest thing that came along was after we moved into Building 70 and we started getting those online systems.
All right.
Yeah. And probably the other were fairly, car distribution, we used to get fairly involved with them. And a pretty good sized system because you were dealing with dealer orders.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you had online.
Driving the plant.
Yeah, and you had online dealer orders right in the major dealership, along with warranty. In other words, if the dealer had a terminal, he could enter warranty information and he could enter his sales information. And of course, the sales forecast, which again drove the parts release. That was all integrated. Pretty good integration of systems, 2 systems there, and they had to come together. Get the 10-day sales forecast, or 10-day sales report, I should say. That was every, the second day after each 10-day report.
Period,
yeah. And so that was a pretty good sized system, and the 2 of them were, in other words, sales and warranty and scheduling was pretty well meshed. And then inventory control, of course.
Yeah, that must have been a horrendous task.
Yeah, with working with material control, and purchasing and then material handling.
Yeah.
We saw a lot of interface there. So there would probably be, half a dozen major systems that was very fascinating to see those.
Can you remember, Bob, any what I'll call peculiar happenings that would be of kind of general interest to people, so to speak?
Probably the big system was driving the assembly plant. You know what I mean? Because they only had 100 jobs ahead, that were scheduled.
Yeah.
well, then the machine would go down, or we'd have problems with somewhere or another. The sales orders had to be reprocessed, whatever, because they were, again, from the orders coming in, they had to drive the assembly. And then we had to send orders to the assembly plants. Probably that assembly line was the most critical.
Okay.
That was the phone call that, you had a hotline.
Uh-huh.
And you jumped when that thing rang.
Ever happened?
Oh yes, yeah. We shut down the assembly plant a few times, and that probably has to be, kind of the top of the peak.
You would get a few calls when that
criticalness.
happened?
Oh yes, yeah.
Who
yeah.
would call people?
He was. Dear, he's still there. Oh dear.
Tracy?
Tracy, yeah, Doug Tracy, and who was before him?
Bob Mooney?
Yeah, well, Bob Mooney, yeah.
Bob Cook was there.
Bob Cook, yes, Bob Cook.
Hackworth, I
Yeah.
guess were those kind of guys.
Yeah, so that assembly broadcast system was probably the, we kept that going. I mean, that was a really top priority.
But you might get, would you have gotten a call or?
Oh, yes.
Uh,
Oh, yes, yeah.
were those guys?
Yeah, if they,
happy?
something, oh, no.
No.
Well, how soon are you going to get that going? And how soon are you going to get, the orders in? If whatever it was.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And usually later on, of course, they call Bill Murphy.
Yeah.
And then he'd get back to us.
Mhm.
But we got quite a few direct calls.
Mhm.
Well, how soon are you going to get? It wasn't if they were getting close, then they'd call us. Say, when are you going to get it going? We need some more orders out here, to run these cars. The blow-ups, they put it out there.
Sure,
Yeah,
on the car.
Yeah, on the car.
Yeah.
And then we'd usually hear from the other end anyway, Bill or Vogt, as the case may be, depending on how long that.
How would Vogt handle those kinds of things?
Just he'd come down once in a while.
Would he?
What's going on? What's going on? What's the big problem? So, and he wasn't all that difficult to.
He didn't jump all over everybody.
No. He knew that quite often it was some mechanical. I say mechanical.
Something broke.
Yeah, something broke, and once in a while it was somebody's fault, though. That the orders weren't somehow or another. Tape got erased.
Uh-huh.
See, got written over. It wasn't tagged right. And of course, you had a tape library system there, supposed to take care of all that. But every once in a while, somebody goof on that. They put the wrong label on, and get it involved back in the cycling again before it was supposed to be. And there was some orders that we were supposed to have to put on the broadcast system.
Lost.
So we had to go back, and we would have anything that we got from the dealers, we spun off on tape or disc. So we always had we protected our
You could
butts.
find it if you had to.
Yeah, we could go back and find it and reconstruct. So it wasn't anything that we ever burned the bridge completely, but they would think so. I'm sure you'd have some people that said, "Oh my gosh, yeah, you shut down the assembly line again." But that was probably the most critical.
Ever get a general manager grumbling about anything or hollering or that sort of thing?
Well, only after the fact, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, we'd have to see him, and it was over. Well, Schlappi, what are you gonna do with that so and so? That sort of thing. Just an offhand remark, nothing that he chewed you out about. Although there's a few times I think, like I say, Tracy got on that assembly line, and I can't think who else. Oh, dear, who worked before Tracy? Oh,
Hackworth.
No.
Cook.
No. Come on.
Mooney.
Huh?
Mooney.
Yeah, Mooney. Rollis was one, but no, he and Tracy were contemporary out there.
Oh, you want to be out? Who's in the car assembly plant?
Yeah.
McGinn.
McGinn,
Okay.
yeah, Jack McGinn.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I can't think now. There was one other name that comes through, and of course traffic. We had a lot of getting the car shipped out.
Shipping. Yeah.
Yeah, shipping out and making sure that certain reliability, that these points were all checked and that the car was going to be shipped to the right place. And ultimately, you still had goof ups there. The car went the wrong place because of some misinformation. However, it was misdirected. So, and so it gave you, I think, a beautiful cross section of GM or Oldsmobile, at least at that time, and the interface we had with the other divisions, because Buick and Pontiac and Cadillac all had similar problems with the data processing and all of their, works.
You caused some midnight oil on occasion?
Oh, yes. Yeah. And I still say to this day, I don't, it's not, I can't verify it, But the programming, I think, took its toll because those guys, would be there and they burned midnight oil.
Mhm.
I didn't get some because I wasn't programming.
Yeah, you were after
Yeah.
sort of.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'd get a
that.
call once in a while, but I didn't have that on site.
Mhm.
And why I say that, I think maybe there was more divorces in the data processing
really?
program. It just seems that way to me.
Yeah.
It's
Well, it's an intense job.
yes, and it was there. You could put 60, 70 hours a week, and I remember
Yeah.
some of those guys did that.
Yeah.
Of course, that was one of the things. Oh, how come you got so much overtime? Well, that was another problem after the fact. But those guys were there really.
Did,
So
the people that you hired into those positions, did you ultimately get to some special way of finding people?
yeah, ultimately it got down to where well, we wanted a degree. Ultimately, it got down where
Okay.
they wanted a degree, either they were 2 year out of community college or a 4 year. Ultimately, it got
Okay.
down to a 4 year,
Yeah.
and through with data processing and systems,
Mm-hmm.
systems management, systems, experience, laying out a system, setting
Yeah.
it up, besides the programming. And I think we had some pretty good. It was interesting interviewing these people, and of course you had to filter out things, and some recommendations if they'd had previous experience. We had probably had a pretty good mix of college grads just coming in,
Yeah.
and then we'd have some people coming over from other experience levels, which was always great to us, and we'd have some transfers from Buick or somebody
Okay.
else too, so that helped a lot too.
But the early days were just people that
Yeah.
came kind of that had interest in
That's right.
fiddling with boards and
Yes,
wires
sir.
and that sort of
So
stuff.
much,
There
yeah.
wasn't very much training out there beyond what you got at IBM.
Very true. Very true. Uh, yeah, like I say, only about the last 2 years of that I kind of got to grind. So
yeah. I mean, that's a nice long stay, Bob.
Yeah.
So you had a good.
Yeah, I
good
sure
pass
enjoyed it
there.
very much. So
Okay. Well,
well,
anything else?
no,
Is that
I
pretty
appreciate just going back through this.
okay?
Used to be for the first 2 or 3 years after I retired, I would dream that I was back at that place.
Is that right?
And I was all in meetings, and there was this going wrong and that going wrong. And I literally went through it for 2 or 3 years. Several times, I would 3, 4, 5 times a month that I just remember just being in that situation, Oh boy. Finally,
Oh yeah,
so what?
it goes away eventually.
Yeah. So it was a rather intense
Okay.
thing, I think. Yeah.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
I appreciate this.
I'm glad you stopped by, and there's one other task I'm going to send
Sure.
you off to do. I'm going to shut this off
Yeah.
here. So,